Good evening. Welcome to Talk to the City. I'm your host, Lee Coleman, and I have one of my best friends here this evening, a guy whose father did some great things for me. His father was my teacher back at Eastside in 1968 when I was a sophomore, and I didn't even know this guy existed until in the 90s. Brother Senator Clayborne.
Good to see you, bro.
Welcome, brother. I'm glad to have you here and Talk to the City and our less than ostentatious studios here in O'Fallon, Illinois. We try to get things, hooked up in East St. Louis, and had a few problems with charter communications, and couldn't get the city to put charter in their place. So, when a brother come from East St. Louis on 3rd and Converse, come from the School of Hard Knocks, you know how to do things for yourself. So we have our own studio here. So we'd like to welcome you here, and we're going to discuss the real things and try to find out what your future is going to be like, because I know most folks have heard that you are not running again. So let's talk about that. Let's do this first. Let's talk a little bit about your history. Born and raised in East St. Louis.
Well, Lee, I'm first of all glad to be here, glad to be in your studio. It's a very nice studio.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
See that you adapt very well.
Yes, sir.
But Lee, I was born, actually, it's interesting, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
because the hospital that would only deliver black babies was Christian Welfare. And my mother actually wanted, just like most African Americans, they were curious about why the white hospital, because it was promoted as being a better hospital. And at the time, St. Mary's in East St. Louis didn't deliver black babies. So I was actually born at Barnes over in St. Louis. December 29th, 1963. Went to Dunbar Elementary School. In fact, I go back as far as going to Head Start at St. Paul Baptist Church down in the basement.
Yeah, before Head Start. Wow. But didn't they used to direct black mothers to have the babies at St. Louis Infirmary?
I'm not sure about
And
that.
then they had to go, if they did get a chance to go to St. Mary's, they had to go through the back door. Did you hear about that?
I didn't hear that.
Okay, all right.
I didn't hear that.
All right, so you went to East Side?
Yeah, went to Dunbar, Lansdowne, East Side, and then graduated from East Side in 1981. Went to Tennessee State in Nashville, where both of my parents went to school. Graduated in 1985 and went on to law school at the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida. Came back here the day after I graduated and worked in the prosecutor's office, and then left there after 2.5 years there and took a job with a firm out of Chicago that had an office in Belleville, Henshaw and Culberson, and I was there for 22 years and started my own shop, Lee, 4.5 years ago.
That's great, that's great. Now your dad, Mr. Clayborne, was my Latin American history teacher, and he's a great dude. I mean, he gave me a $1,000 scholarship from his fraternity when I went to the University of Illinois, so I always did like that guy. And plus, in those days, he was a pretty tough customer. If you clown around, you might get some hands, man. I witnessed that in the bathroom one time. One of the students got out of hand, and he thought he could deal with Mr. Clayborne, but after they fixed his nose, he was okay. I'm serious. That guy didn't rat. So you ran for. How did you get to be senator in the 57th senatorial district here?
Well, Lee, I mean, I truly believe it was a godsend. I was, at the time that former Senator Hall died, I actually had been selected by the FBI Academy to do a week-long program called the Law Institute. I was recommended by the FBI to participate because I represented police departments. And before I left and Senator Hall had not even been eulogized, I told some people interested that I was interested in the position. I was checking my messages on a Wednesday and received a call from actually John Barcivic, asking me if I was truly interested. I told him I was, and he said stay in touch. I got home that Friday night, called him Saturday morning. He said if I wanted, it was mine.
Did you ever have any inkling that you would ever be involved in politics?
I did. I was like most young African American males in East St. Louis, at least I think, I admired Carl Officer when he first got elected, and decided that maybe that's the route for me. I didn't know about being mayor, but I thought I wanted to get into government and to help try to make our communities a little better, create economic opportunities for African American and small businesses, and generally just try to be a solid role model and do the right thing for the people that I represent.
So what do you think the greatest challenge is to be in being a public servant?
You know, I think the greatest challenge, Lee, one is having tough skin. You know, I learned the first day I was there, I came in at the end of the session, and literally I walked on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
and I started voting. And what you find out is, Lee, that once you vote, regardless of what your conviction is, half the people are going to be for you and half the people are going to be mad at you. So, you know, so the biggest challenge is understanding that you have to do the right thing and you're not going to please everybody.
Absolutely. So, your district is, what's the total number of your constituents approximately?
So when we redrew these districts, each senatorial district had 218,000 people. I go from the Mississippi west all the way over to Lebanon and Mascoutah. North would be Granite City, and south would be parts of Sauget and Cahokia.
So what do you see as, in terms of attitude, I want to use the word apathy maybe, with reference to the constituents who are European as opposed to the ones that are African American?
Actually, your white constituents, which is my district, is about 72% white. They're a little more involved in understanding and following what I do, a lot more than some of my constituents and some of my more challenged economic and impoverished communities.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think that is? Why do you think the people who are in the most need of your services and understanding what you do, why do you think they're not as much engaged as they should be?
Lee, I think that they just have so many other social issues that they're trying to deal with. And I think to a greater extent, over the course of my time, we really, and it's not just in the impoverished areas and high unemployment areas, I think it's really an issue of really understanding what I do. You know, I get calls about street lights, I get calls about potholes. That's not anything that I deal with. Those are local issues. And I think people just tend to think that because you're an elected official, that you have the influence to get those things resolved.
So how do we get them to understand the bigger picture? Because you take a bad rep a lot of time for not being the quintessential, East St. Louis, Washington Parks, Cahokia politician. So how do we get them to understand the bigger picture? Because you've passed some very serious legislation that's very crucial to economic development in our communities. So how do we get them to do that?
One, Lee, I think part of it is understanding that it's important. I think that's the first issue, understanding that your elected officials should bring value and that we should be held accountable for our jobs. I think all too often people see us and they say, well, you know, I know he's not going to do anything, I know he can't help me, or he's not willing. It's not that the person's not willing, and the fact of it is that you're asking us to do things a lot of times that are not within our job duties or description. So first of all, is caring and taking time to understand what our roles are and what we do. Mm-hmm. And I think once you understand that, then we're able to more effectively show what we're capable of doing and to try and address the issues that affect you every day. Even more so, the state affects individual lives more so than the federal government does.
Mm-hmm. But we don't understand that in our communities.
No.
You know, another thing I've always talked to you about, and it's, to me, it's one of the biggest problems with African American politicians. That is, you know, I think sometimes they feel like, I'm not going to brag, but I don't think you guys market what you do well enough to make sure that our people understand what you're doing. But the News Democrat and the other papers are marketing the opposite, what they think are negative. So, you know, we've always talked about that, and I try to have our station open to our elected officials. You've come a lot, but a lot of them didn't come because they didn't see the value and talking about what they've done. It's not like you're bragging, but your constituents need to know what you're doing because the criticism is going to come.
Right. Well, you know, Lee, and I agree with you on that. One of the challenges you have is depending on what you do for a community and or an area, and if you're not able to reciprocate and provide those same services or that same opportunity, then you're criticized, and people don't recognize that different communities bring different values and different opportunities. So you really can't, as those saying, compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Some have areas that may call for manufacturing, economic, more retail, commercial retail, where others may not have those same advantages. And a lot of that is working with the city or community that has already planned for those opportunities versus a community that has not planned for those opportunities.
You know, I've been involved with you with reference to your mentoring program, which is very valuable. I don't think we marketed that thing as we should have. We've done some things in that regard, but you also take maybe 150 young African American girls and boys, young men and women, to historically black universities. We've had a chance to go to Medgar Evers' home. We saw George Washington Carver's grave. Booker T. Washington's inside his home. So those are great things. Why did you not market that more? And why, when we did talk about it, why didn't our community see that as being valuable?
Well, one, Lee, you really have to be careful when you fund or get funding for those programs, because you still receive all kinds of calls from people asking you to fund theirs. And I tell them, I say, if I take away from my program, I mean, there's only so many dollars. And I believe, like you believe your program is important, I believe my program is just as important, or if not more. And you create tension when you don't support those programs. So you would hope that those young people or those adults that benefit from your program, that they will spread the word. Because if you don't support all these programs that everybody has, then you create enemies. To answer the second part of your question is, why isn't it important? I just don't think people really understand. There's a simple phrase that I use: a little boy, a little girl can't be what they've never seen. And some people have not experienced that, these places or flying, and they just don't understand. They don't see the hope in changing a child or young adult's atmosphere and helping them see that the world is much bigger than their 5 blocks or 6 block radius, that they really have an opportunity to excel and be wherever and achieve whatever goals and aspirations if they're really willing to work hard. You know, I have sons that have done well, and it's because they committed themselves to the task at hand. They had a vision for the future, and it wasn't easy, but they stayed on that road, they worked hard, and they were able to achieve their goals. And I think the real challenge on that is understanding that, the old adage that if it's worth having, then it's worth working for.
You know, it's strange to me. I know, coming up in East St. Louis, and at that time, the African American community stressed education. And if there was anyone out there pushing that agenda, they were just heroes in our community. So what the heck happened? You know, here you are taking 150 kids, you know, to these historically black universities and paving the way for them to actually attend those universities. And it wasn't looked upon as one of the greatest things in our community when we stress education. So what happened between the time, you know, when I grew up in East St. Louis and now that we don't value the same thing? I mean, what happened to us, man?
Well, Lee, you take my youngest son. He's probably tired of me using him as an example. He's about 6'5", 226 pounds. If he walks in the barber shop or most places, the first thing they ask is, what sport do you play?
Yeah.
Because these athletes are making millions and millions of dollars. It's changed a whole lot since we grew up, where I remember Terry Metcalf left the St. Louis Cardinals because he was trying to get a $100,000 contract and went to Canada. But now you hear these guys getting millions, tens of millions of dollars, whether it's sports or whether it's music, and we have these shows, I don't know if they're still on, Pimp My Ride and
Walk My Dog.
yeah, and these big mansions that they're showing, and that's something that's a little easier in terms of supposedly having the talent versus sitting down and putting hard work in and studying and staying after. So I think and I'm not criticizing any athletes, but everybody's not going to be there. If you look in the NBA, there's one LeBron James. You know, there's one Michael Jordan. Everybody's not going to be a Michael Jordan or LeBron James or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or some of the other players that we saw growing up. But you have an opportunity to be a successful doctor or teacher, or even in the trades. We're trying to fight and open up the trades, but you have a better chance of being a manager or CEO of a bank than you do being a star in the NFL.
So how do we get back to that? What do we need to do to put that front and center again?
We de-emphasize sports. We hold even the athletes accountable for being better students. We set them out just like anybody else and promote those athletes that not only excel on the basketball court or in the football field, but we also talk about their academic achievement and success too. You know, one of my sons, who's now a Wall Street banker, he played basketball. And the sad thing about it, Lee, was when they gave out scholar athletes, he was probably the only African American male athlete who received that designation every year. In fact, Lee, I was so naive that his senior year he came home excited, and I said, "What are you excited about?" He says, "Dad, I have 2 African American males in my honors course." And I'm like, "Okay, what does that mean?" He says, "Dad, other than P or health," he said, "I've never had an African American male in one of my classes the whole time he had been at Belleville West."
Wow.
Because he took all honors courses.
So, you know, we lay a lot of the burden on the, you know, elected officials and athletes, but what is the role of the clergy? What is the role of the clergy? I mean, I'm in my occupation, what I do now, I'm working under the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We had very few African Americans in Congress, Senate or the House, and there was a bill passed that gave broad powers to agencies to make sure that African American women were participating in federally aided contracts. And that was done by a 5'7" guy by the name of Martin Luther King, who had the heart of a lion. And he was buttressed by Malcolm X, who took a somewhat of an opposite view, but they were both loving their communities. So what is the role of the clergy in this whole scheme of things?
Well, I mean, obviously the clergy has an opportunity every Sunday to stand before his parishioners or her parishioners and influence them. And I think we have to change the dynamics of what is currently happening. You know, if you look at history, most of our organizations, civil rights organizations, came out of the church. Even our fraternities and sororities are based or have principles based upon the Bible and religion. And we have to use religion and the Bible effectively to support our communities, to support businesses in our communities, and to understand that, you know, I use one of the stories that one of Dr. King's daughters gave at a conference. And she said, father and son were out in the lake in a boat. And the son was 15, and he started laughing. And his father said, "What's wrong?" He says, I don't want to tell you. I don't want to tell you. He says, "Yeah, I guess everything's all right." So 15 minutes later, he starts laughing again. And the father's getting a little annoyed. He says, "Why are you laughing?" He says, I don't want to tell you. Then the third time he starts laughing, Father says, you better tell me what's going on. He says, well, the side of your boat is leaking. He says, you're going to go under and drown. And the father looks at him and says, we're in the same boat. That if I drown, you'll drown too. And I think that the shortcoming, Lee, is that we don't understand that we're all in the same boat. And if somebody's failing, we're all failing.
So why does most communities understand that and ours don't? The Hispanics, La Raza is about Hispanics. The National Defense League is about the Jewish community. The Arab League is about the Arab community. But the NAACP is inclusive of everything. You know, humpback whales, sharks, you know, whatever. Everybody's included. Why do we have to peel off and group everybody with us when other groups can be totally confident in saying, La Raza is all about Hispanics. It's not about the color of the Rainbow Coalition. Want everybody in there.
Right. I think that the difference is, Lee, that two things. One, all those communities have a common language that they speak, their own language. And I think that draws them together along with their own culture. We don't have a common language that's our origin. You know, we came from different tribes, and I even think during slavery there were divisions created that we have not been able to overcome. And until we understand that we're in the same boat, and that if we fail, everybody in that boat fails. I think the other thing too is, well, I don't think I know, you know, if you look at how neighborhoods are built, they're built based upon subdivisions, which are based upon the value of the home that you can afford. When we grew up in East St. Louis, you know, you may have known a doctor or lawyer that lived a couple of blocks from you down the street. Well, now that doesn't exist anymore. So young men and women don't consistently see the doctors in their neighborhoods. You look in East St. Louis, I don't know if there's a new doctor's office or dental practice that's probably opened up in 10, 15 years.
Yeah, because we basically boycotted our own communities. We have about 8 minutes left. I want to ask you something. You know, I got some bad news about 3 weeks ago. I got a phone call from you, and you said that you wasn't running, and I was real upset. You know, I didn't kick the dog, but you know, I was kind of upset. So, why did you come to that conclusion not to run again? And I thought you were a very successful senator. Let me tell you something. Let me tell the people out there. I operate a program that's all about diversity, and I've gone to several individuals, elected officials, clergy, civic leaders, so forth and so on. And the only person that would heed my cry for help was Senator James Clayborne. He even introduced a bill for me to help me do what I do. That is to help African Americans, you know, participate in federally aided programs that what Title VI says you should be able to do. You were the only one. So you were my rock, and I want people to know that. Senate Bill 263. So I really appreciate your involvement. But you weren't the only person that I asked to help. No one else thought it was important. But they talk about these young boys with their pants pulled down and the fact that they get involved in drugs and they think they need more police officers to curb crime. But crime is about opportunity and hopelessness and things of that nature. You know, a guy won't steal if he's got a job. So I'm going to miss you a whole lot. But why did you decide? You know, you got me out there in the middle of this lake and I'm paddling and where's Senator Clayborne? So, you know, but I know what you're doing, and you told me you were very happy, and I'm happy that you're happy.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to do that?
Well, Lee, more than two things, but primary, I've been there 22 and a half years. I still have 15 months left. So you're talking almost 24 years, and it's a 4-year term. I did not want to do this for 28 years. I never thought that I would do it for 22 years. So one of the things I believe in terms of shortcoming of African American political figures is that we don't pave a way for somebody else like us to follow through. We tend to die in office, and I made a choice a long time ago that I would not do this the rest of my life. So one, I wanted to be able to help influence who would replace me, and two, it's a 4-year term, and 2.5 years into this upcoming term, we will redraw districts. So I wanted that person to have the opportunity, Lee, to be able to draw his district and be successful in his district. The other thing I've learned over the course of my tenure in the Senate, 4 years from now, if I told you I was retiring, you know what you would have said?
What's that?
Why are you retiring?
Mm-hmm.
And then, Lee, I'm looking for the next phase of my life. I've married this wonderful woman who I want to spend more time
Don't you
with.
want to brag about it all the time?
All the time.
Man. I heard about it before I ever met her. I met her today. Boy, I saw some pictures, but I knew what she was all about before I actually saw her. So
Yeah.
you're doing all right, brother.
I appreciate it. And there's some other things I just want to do and start new careers.
Mm.
So I think the time is now, Lee, and I'm ready to move forward and take on new challenges.
But the other part of that thing that's very important is that we make sure we don't lose that seat. So now we got a young man, I think it's Chris Bell.
Chris Bell.
Yeah, so what do you think of that young man?
I think he's a very dynamic young man. I think he has the energy. I think he has the drive and the intelligence to do an outstanding job.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm supporting him 100%.
Okay. Well, Senator, I thank you for coming by. And you say, we talked about Jordan just a little bit. He's doing great.
Yeah, George's doing. I talked to George today. He's doing
Yeah.
great. You know what's amazing, Lee? He has brothers that are really supporting him, and one of his brothers, who's a Wall Street banker, is making sure that he has opportunities this summer that neither one of them had. He has a chance to work on Wall Street with some of the bigger banks in New York.
And that college tour thing, I know it's your son and you had strict rules and regulations. They were going to be successful one way or the other. But that college tour really helped those young men and women when they get a chance to go and see how college life is, different communities, and being able to go to the embassy suites and be able to order off menus and things like that. That's something that you thought was so important. So we really are going to miss you. And we hope that Mr. Belt gets in office, and I know you're going to be working hard to make sure that he gets elected in your spare time. So we really want to thank you for coming by today, and I really will miss you, and you're my guy. You know, everybody knows that throughout the agency I work and throughout this community. We've been buddies for a long time, and you've always been there when I asked for you. You've always been there trying to make sure that your community got the best shot at being successful. You introduced some great bills during your tenure, so we're going to miss you, and we don't give a damn what the New Democrats say, because they've never been for anything positive for East St. Louis. They've always tried to shoot down, I'm saying this, they've always tried to shoot down anything that they thought was going to be successful for us, any individual, any program, any project. So as a Democrat, you know, you can write and I can talk, so we still go over the internet.
God bless you. I appreciate all
much.
your support.
Yes. Thank you so much. Okay.